Hi, welcome to this part of my multi-part review of the Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition core book. This time we're going to take a look at three disciplines, which are Protean, Quietus, and Serpentis. These three disciplines are quite interesting in that a lot of players like to use them, they want to get their hands on them. Even in the game, they're always looking for someone to teach these disciplines to them. However, I think one is more popular than the other two, and that is the Protean discipline, and I will tell you why I think so. And one seems a bit less popular. I do not understand exactly why. If I'm not mistaken, I think Marco from the Multiverso Distópico channel also mentioned that Serpentis wasn't too popular. I'm not exactly sure. I'm going to put the link to his channel in the description below. So, well, let's get started with Protean. Now, this is the discipline that everyone wants because, on one hand, you have many staple powers from classical stories of vampires. That is, the ability to change your shape, to turn into a bat or a wolf, to turn into mist. All of that is in the Protean category. And this is a discipline that is quite characteristic or common to see in the members of the Gangrel clan. So as you will see in a few minutes, the Protean discipline has a lot of potential to damage your enemies, but also some utility aspects to it. Because you could use your eyes to see in the dark. However, you must be mindful when you use this part of the Protean discipline, because it could cause some intimidation. People will start to notice that your eyes look quite weird. So for the Gangrel that usually develop quite some bestial features when they, for example, go into frenzy, this can threaten to break the protocols of the Masquerade. One of the coolest aspects of the Protean discipline is when you can grow feral claws from your hands. These are quite damaging, they deal aggravated damage, and some supernatural creatures can only be damaged through aggravated damage. So feral claws, everybody wants them. And then we have things such as, for example, earth meld, that you can go into the ground, like fuse with the ground under your feet. And this can help you escape, for example, enemies that are chasing you. It can also give you a somewhat safe measure of rest during the day. There is somewhat of a superstition that they say that antediluvians, hundreds of antediluvians, have actually fused with the ground below. So you could be walking in any city and you have 100 of very powerful and terrifying vampires, and they say that when the time of Gehenna comes, they will rise and devour everyone. However, this earth meld aspect of Protean, you cannot be certain that you will be completely safe, because if the ground is disturbed when you are resting, the effect will break apart and you will return to your normal shape. You can also assume, as I was telling you, the shape of, for example, wolves or bats. You can also change into mist, and as your mastery of the Protean discipline develops, you could even, for example, swim in the earth as if it were water. You could also toughen up your skin quite a bit, to the point that it may rival some of the effects of fortitude, not all of them, but it's still quite handy considering the Protean feels a bit like a catch-all of vampiric powers. You can also pretend to be alive, and this is quite useful for the Gangrel that sometimes they, as I was telling you, some of their physical features get deformed because of their frenzy. As you go further along the path of Protean, you may gain the ability to change your shape so that you become some sort of vampire hybrid, taking the characteristics of some sort of animal that is in tune or in accordance to your vampire's personality, or just an affinity towards a specific animal. So you could look like a hybrid of a vampire with a giant rat, or a raven, or a wolf, or anything that you can imagine. You could also affect your mist transformation so that you can attain some sort of spectral body. It looks like a misty form of your own vampire, and you could even use disciplines that do not require physical contact. You could also learn to expel things from your body, so this is quite useful if somebody stakes your vampire. They could decide to, for example, leave you staked so that the sun eliminates you in the next morning, but you could expel that stake from your body, just shoot it out, and you could surprise your enemies with a vengeance. And at the highest level of the Protean discipline, you could even transform into some sort of super vampire. You take less damage, you take more actions per round, and you could even deal more damage. This is different from when you assume a feral or bestial form, because in that form you have heightened senses and you do have enhanced damage capability, but this one enhances your vampire overall. Now let's talk about Quietus. Quietus is a discipline of death and assassination. This is a discipline quite suitable for the Assamites. They use Quietus to eliminate their targets or to incapacitate them, to facilitate diablerization and get closer to divinity according to their own worldview. So you have things such as silence of death that actually makes it so that the sound around you at a certain radius simply does not exist. So this is great to assassinate your enemy, so sounds such as screaming and struggling are not heard. As you develop your abilities in Quietus, you gain a very poisonous touch. Your vampire can basically convert a bit of blood into poison. So this is quite useful. You could apply it to your weapons, or perhaps smear it in some place, perhaps in a drink, in a goblet of blood, and you know that your enemies are going to drink from that. Later on, you could even drown your targets in their own blood. This works a bit like the vessels, the blood vessels kind of like explode, they burst, and they start to fill the lungs and create a sort of like strangulation effect from within. So this means that even vampires are affected by this. Even though vampires do not breathe, a constricting or a crushing effect is caused. The whole theme of deadly blood, or poisonous blood you could say, it's more on the corrosive side of things. It can develop to the point that you could spit it out as a sort of attack, or you could smear it on your weapons to the point that your weapons could actually dissolve after a few rounds, so you need to be quick. As you grow in power, you could obtain things that feel a lot more supernatural, because for example, you could even, through your sight, you could make your enemies sweat out blood, causing wounds to humans. But even if you use this on vampires, you also cause a sense of regret or mourning, of loss and guilt within your enemies. Quietus also allows you to extend the area of silence that you project. That is, you could choose an area, not just a small section around you. You could even lace mortals. You could take a mortal and put some corrosive or damaging or poisonous blood within that mortal, so that when a vampire feeds from that mortal, he becomes intoxicated or infected. You could even implant some emotions within a certain mortal so that a vampire becomes emotionally unstable. At the highest levels, you could even purify the toxins from someone else's blood or your own. Or you could even touch someone and overwhelm that target with impressions and memories of anyone that has had the blood that is currently running in your system. The manifestation of Quietus that is perhaps the most terrifying is the Condemn the Sins of the Father, which consists of the following. After you have successfully used one of your Quietus powers on another vampire, you can basically make it so that the descendants of your target are also affected by any deadly effects that you have used to affect that target. You could affect your enemy with your most corrosive power, and all of his descendants would be affected as well. You could kill many at the same time if used successfully. Now let's talk about Serpentis. Serpentis is a very interesting discipline. It's the discipline of the followers of Set. You could basically consider it as if you were to combine the sorcerer's powers of Thulsa Doom from Red Sonja, or the first Conan film, and anything that you have read about in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So a user of Serpentis could have eyes that allow him to entrance mortals or other vampires of lesser willpower, but you could also extend your tongue so that it is used as a close range weapon. Your tongue effectively looks like the tongue of a snake, but it's quite deadly, almost like a metal whip of sorts. You could even drink blood from those that you strike with your tongue. Your skin could also become quite snaky, flexible, scaly, very resistant to damage, but also quite flexible, allowing you to get into very small places. As long as your head fits, the rest of your body will squeeze through. You could also turn into a cobra, as just like it sounds, a monstrous cobra with a lethal bite. You could remove your own heart or the heart of others after a grueling and somewhat prolonged surgery, and take that heart and you could hide it, or that is to keep you safe from being staked. Or if you wanted to use that heart as a sort of like for a ransom or for blackmail or as a sort of hostage, that can also be done. So you can basically coerce or rather force your enemy to do something, otherwise you will do something to that enemy's heart. Later on you have more control over Serpentis, to the point that you could only obtain the fangs of a monstrous cobra without having to change your entire body. And you could also assume a sort of like a god shape or god form or godhead appearance that represents any of the Egyptian deities, to the point that you are more effective in combat, of course, but also quite charismatic and persuasive. The power to remove the heart from your victim becomes more effective later on, to the point that you could deal damage and immediately just reach into your victim and rip out that heart, kind of like Mola Ram from the Indiana Jones Temple of Doom movie. And you could also assume, this is the maximum power of Serpentis, you can assume the shadow of a Pep shape. You basically become a sort of like a snaky shadow deity of sorts, and you could infiltrate different places, but also be quite deadly in combat. So what do I think of these three disciplines? Well, first of all, Protean is one of the coolest disciplines in the game, in my opinion. And everybody always wants Protean for his or her vampire. There are just so many useful things about it, some of it unique to Protean, assuming the shape of animals and turning to mist and growing claws and becoming really strong suddenly. Those are just so typical, so archetypical perhaps, of vampires in fiction and folklore, and it's going to be useful for so many things. As long as you develop the discipline correctly, you are going to get a power for any situation or encounter. You have powers that make you effective in combat, some others that allow you to hide, some others that allow you to navigate the environment faster and without being noticed. It's all there. When it comes to Quietus, this is also a very interesting discipline, especially because it allows you to eliminate your opponent quickly and stealthily. It's a very powerful method of assassination, but because the ones who are going to be using this are the Asamites, and because no one trusts Asamites, it's still going to be quite difficult to use Quietus, because any mysterious or strange death that occurs and no one knew how a vampire was killed so immediately and why there wasn't any sound or noise of struggle, they are always going to suspect a user of Quietus. And when it comes to Serpentis, I think this one may not be too popular with some groups or categories, because you would need to be a follower of Set, and no one trusts followers of Set, of course. So it's a bit of a dilemma, similar to the Quietus. However, the Quietus discipline has so many powers that allow you to kill immediately, very much in tune and in the specialization of the Asamites. But Serpentis feels more on the flexible side of things. You have a lot of utility powers. You also have some discipline expressions that have to do with becoming more effective in combat, of course. But sometimes you feel like Serpentis, all of the powers in Serpentis, have been covered in other disciplines. Oh, you turn into a shadow? Well, the Sombra can also do that. Oh, you grew some lethal weapon? Well, the Protean also has that. So Serpentis sometimes doesn't feel as unique or as special, but maybe that also reflects how the followers of Set are a bit apart from the other vampire clans. So they have to cover almost every aspect, because it's usually them as a clan against other clans, because they are trying to enact the will of Set upon the world. They are going to clash with many of the other clans, so Serpentis is a way through which they can gain access to powers that in normal circumstances only a few certain clans using some of their disciplines could have access to. So these three disciplines, Protean, Quietus and Serpentis, are quite lethal, some of them a bit more on the utility side of things, or more situational, but nonetheless they are there so that your vampire can deal death while staying alive and securing perhaps a getaway route in the process. Well, thanks for watching this part of my Vampire the Masquerade 20th anniversary core book review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know, and if you haven't seen my other parts of this multi-part review, all of the links will be in the description below. Thanks again, and see you later.